Okay, everybody. Oops, I know what I haven't done. Let me just. All this talk of which view we're using, I've got to put myself up. Okay. Well, I don't know what it's like where people are, but I think so far I don't think we've seen the sun in Cambridge yet on Midsummer Day, so that's half of the course, isn't it? So wait a little bit forwards and just try going forwards enough so that you feel there's a sort of response in your pelvis, almost pulling you back, because that's actually one of the things that would happen, especially if you can keep your back and shoulders a little bit relaxed. And that may make you a little bit more aware of this sense of pulling through your body. It's everywhere, of course, but we want to focus on hips and lower back and just gradually yielding to that. This quality of yielding and it's often referred to as simply relaxing, but it's a sort of, I guess you'd say it's a speciality of Tai Chi, and again, it's another one of these things that is often explored in the martial side of the art, to do with not actively resisting an overwhelming force. Terms like relax don't really do it justice. It's actually quite a powerful feeling, and you can get a sense of that with this idea of yielding to the pull of gravity. And of course, it's one half of an equation. When we think about yin yang, people talk about yang as a separate thing, which is a bit odd, really, but we do that. Then yang would represent the waves crashing in on the beach. Yin, on the other hand, would represent the opposite movement outwards, and what they call the undertow. If you've ever been in the sea and the wave washes you towards the beach, and just as you're about to get up, it all goes out again and pulls you with it. It can be quite frightening. So it's not a simple giving way, and it requires a certain amount of attention to detail. Another example might be water running away through a plug hole. And of course, there you've got a structure that creates a particular effect or supports a particular effect. So when we think about our structure, when we think about our skeleton, the skeleton and the area around it, there's muscles and tendons and ligaments that are directly associated with supporting the skeleton. And that offers us a certain amount of stability for the downward movement to have an effect. Some people say that we feel as though our bones are pushing up, but the soft tissue of the body, the muscles and so on, are dropping down. I think if that's an image that helps you, then fine. Just be a little bit cautious, I think, about this phrase, the bones push up, because what you can then get is a sense of, well, I've got to somehow push myself up. It's more like the bones just stand there, you see, if that makes sense. There are lots of little ways of describing these things, and none of them are the complete story. So it's a bit like if you wanted to know about, what Cornwall was like or something like that, you might go to an exhibition of paintings and photographs of Cornwall and wander around the room seeing this and that and the other. No one painting, no one picture is going to tell you what Cornwall is is like. But wandering around, you might build up an idea of Cornwall, and then you can sort of add more detail and so on and so forth. But in the end, it's your experience that makes the difference. Somebody who knew Cornwall and had wandered around it, going into that exhibition, would look at it and go, "Oh yeah, you can see that," but they would have a very different perspective on it. And there's often the fear. People sometimes say to me, "What if I get it wrong?" And I gently tell people not to worry about that, because you will. The whole point of learning something new is that it's new, and very rarely do we get it right first time. So don't be frightened of making mistakes. I think there can sometimes be a bit of a downer on making mistakes in our culture, but actually they're very much part of the learning process. And you'll find, I think, with the Tai Chi postures and the movements, that as your experience of them grows, so does how you're doing the exercise. It doesn't remain the same in any case. We do something, sometimes it works for us, and then after a while it stops working, and then we have to rethink it, and so on and so forth. And then just raising your arms. Now, I talk about that here because I think these opening exercises are actually quite a useful forum for going through these things. They're very simple. There's no kind of, oh dear, I can't remember this bit, or what did he do with his hands there, or whatever. And also, because they're a little bit faster, sometimes the feedback that we get from making a change in our posture or how we're doing an exercise can be very quick and immediate. So for instance, if you just, I'm going to encourage you to do it wrong. So here, if I stand here and just move my arms from side to side, and I don't really turn in the middle of my body, you see there's a bit of movement in my chest. If you try that, it's like, it feels very different to if you just start to sink your weight again and turn in the center of your body. So we can contrast things. Another thing you might want to try very carefully when as you do this is moving from this position with your hips sinking back to pulling your knees back. And what does that do to the movement? And so on and so forth. Yeah, there's a little bit of experimentation involved. And then check out. So rocking your weight forwards and back. So I guess this is another good one. We tend to start off with the very simple exercises, giving you a chance to bring your attention into your body and listening to your body. A great Tai Chi player in this country, a guy called Paul Compton, I've met a couple of times. He said one of the nice things about Tai Chi is if you walk into a room and there's a bunch of people doing Tai Chi, they'll all be doing the same thing differently. Everybody brings an awareness of their own body that is appropriate for you right now into the practice. And so once again, we have this overlap and this merging of what we think of as mind, body, movement, or energy. Hands out to your sides. Swaying in the river. The thing I like about exercises like this is their very simplicity means that we have an opportunity to apply some very fundamental ideas, that to do with posture and rooting down, but also just constructing this image of being in the water and how that might feel with the resistance of the water and with the support of the water. What changes start to happen in our body. It's effectively using the image to send an instruction to the body to make this sort of movement in as though it were in water. The body doesn't really know whether it's in water or not. And then we can start to see how our body is responding. There might be moments where we're thinking, that's not particularly good. Maybe you're a bit stiff in your back, or maybe you don't quite get the kind of sense of alignment and so on and so forth. So, you know, as you get to know the South better, and as you get to know the Tai Chi approach better, you might think, oh, maybe I can relax my hips. Sometimes that, you know, if you're standing there and it's all a bit shaky. So can you just get that sense of dropping down? Maybe it's a knee that's stiffening up. So once we've begun that process of observation, we also have the possibility for change. And then hands coming around in front of your hips, dropping back and pushing up. And as you do this, notice where, you know, we get that sense of expansion in the belly. It goes a little bit further up the body. It'll go right up into your shoulders, but thinking of this area between hips and waist, that's the part of the body you want to really feel is sinking into the ground and retaining that connection to the ground. That what we refer to sometimes in Tai Chi is the lower dantian. Don't get too sort of caught up in exotic terminology, but dantian translates as, or some people translate it as energy center, but a more accurate translation is sea of elixir, or sea of energy, if you prefer, or field, area. Now changing to the wild goose, because our arms are going out to the sides, there tends to be a bit of a pull here, the lower part of the ribs. So we can use this exercise to bring our attention to the next area upwards, which is again roughly between solar plexus and chest, lower ribs, heart, the middle dantian. And then changing to heart in the clouds. And here, because our arms are going right up, our attention goes up and includes now shoulders and head, which is the area of the upper dantian. And as always, I'm using these terms in a very loose sense rather than very precise. So if you come across the terms in a different context, it may well have come across a much more precise location, but it's not necessary for what we're going to be doing here. So with this one, the movement begins in the belly, rises to the chest, and expands upwards and downwards. So we're going to link these up into a three-part sequence, sometimes referred to as balancing the three dantian. So we'll start with rooting down, belly, and then dropping down. And then as we start the wild goose, we feel the expansion in the same place, gradually rising, just like the tide coming up the beach, and then withdrawing again. And then higher up, the lower dantian, and then back to the beginning. With the first of these, keep your feet flat on the ground. With the second and the third, don't think of coming up on your toes, just let your weight come a little bit forward so it feels as though your heels are just about to come off the ground, just to give that slight extra lift. So this could be an interesting way of looking at the body. The dantians are related to lots of things to do with the evolution of energy, but also the sort of what's sometimes referred to as the homeostatic balance in the body, the sort of regulation, and I suppose you could say coordination of the body, all the different functions. So that's one thing. Another thing is, if you're interested in the breathing, I think you've all done with me this. I've talked about this idea of an abdominal breathing. And if it suits you to do that, you could regulate with the movement with your breath by taking an in-breath here. So this represents the expansion in the belly. Breathing out. Then as you breathe in again, you breathe in with the belly expanding, and then the solar plexus, lower part of the ribs. And parting the clouds up into the chest a little bit. And give you different options of ways to work in here, because as always, you know, different priorities. And a third aspect that I personally find very interesting is if we begin to add a turn in it. So once you're aware of those three areas, here as you do rooting down, you could just turn in the lower dantian and just again observe what happens above that. And what will happen is the rest of the upper body simply follows that movement. And then you turn in the lower dantian, and then you turn a little bit more in the middle, and everything above that turns the same degree, but everything below it is sort of left behind slightly. And then it's lower, middle, and finally the upper. So that there's just a little bit more movement without straining possible. Try the other way. Possible at each level. And it only has to be a small fraction of a movement. It's not a big movement. So here, if you could think in terms of, say, the lower rib, going a little bit further than the hip below it. And now you can think of the shoulder going a little bit further than the lower rib below it, but not creating a tightening. And in this way, we begin to understand how all movement, not just the turning, but all movement really rises and expands when we do what we might refer to as the yang element of a movement. Yang is a rising, expanding movement, a continually rising, expanding movement until it just returns to its source, to the yin element. no point should that extra movement cause a sort of stiffening up. So it's often very, very small. We're training our awareness to recognize that. Do one more on each side. So one of the interesting things for me is related to the phrase in Tai Chi that 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds or overcome 1,000 pounds. The implication being if we make a small movement or a small effort or a gentle effort somewhere in the right way and everything else is correct, that effort can have big ramifications. So now we're going to change to Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. And in a way, it's the same way. There's a same thing. There's a little bit of an expansion between the foot and the hip, building up through the side of the body. And eventually we get this long reach up. As I've often said, this sort of thing is very much connected to our awareness because these very small movements in the body that we can't see but we can feel are often very influenced by thoughts and images, feelings, memories, and so on and so forth. So we've become a little less dependent on the choreography of the movement. So for instance, I'm going to come in a bit closer, my hand will disappear. So with this one, we could start off with quite a big movement up and down in our hips, just as we got on the previous exercises. And if you can use that to really grow your awareness of the responses in the body to that, particularly in the upper part of the body, that feeling of a push up, a wave moving upwards, an expansion upwards, however you label it, then what we can start to do is make the rising and falling of the hip smaller and smaller without actually returning to a point where we're stiffening up and resisting the pull of gravity. So you see my hips are still dropping back, but retain the awareness of the movement within the body. For me, this is an essential element in my progress in Tai Chi, this growing awareness and an ability to make use of small movements, hidden movements. And again, it's not just mind and body that really integrate there, but it's also in those small movements that we start to get a sense of what we might call energy and be able to work with that energy. So now, pushing in 4 directions. Same thing, feeling the build up through hips, back, belly, ribs. And when we do the turn, feeling the turn in the same way. Building up through the body. And the reverse movement follows the same pattern, but in reverse. So everything pushes out from the ground and from your center. At that point of connection between your center and the ground, returns to it. There's a moment of pausing, and then the push out comes again. we gradually learn more about how we can work with these elements of Tai Chi, the body, mind, the energy, through an image, an idea, a memory, recollection of a feeling, all sorts of ways that we might approach. And no one way is better than another. It's just sort of what works for you at any particular time. Until we get to a point really where it becomes intuitive. But you have to be a little bit cautious thinking that, I think, because it's very easy to think, well, it's just happening. And then you may realize that it's not, because your attention has drifted away. And somehow you have to, it's a bit like driving a car, really. You can think about other things, you can work intuitively, but it's probably not a great idea to pick up a book and start reading it, or start texting on the phone or something like that. You do need to maintain that overall focus of attention. One more. One very obvious thing that does get cultivated in this way is that sense of connection and what we think of as internal strength in Tai Chi. Now, your hands drop down, drawing out, circling palms. And then add in the turn. Now switch sides. And then again the turn. It's comfortable. Now rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Remember, this is your hips going back, pivoting on the legs. Make sure that you're not going so far that you're encouraging your back to stiffen up, because that will restrict the movement. There is, of course, a feeling of a soft stretch in the back as you go forwards. Just be very careful again with that. Lower back can be very tight. And whilst it's a good exercise for the lower back, overdoing it would be a good idea. Good. Come to that position. Just stand for a moment. See if again you can get this sense of something within you holding you up. After the class, if you go and sit down, try and just register the difference between sort of sitting on a chair quite tense and then just relaxing, and try it a couple of times. I'll just quickly show you a little thing you can do. You sit there and then you deliberately tighten up your back and then relax, and tighten up your back and then relax, and see what happens between you and the chair. This sense of it's almost like you don't feel the chair as much. And if you can stand and say, for instance, let your shoulders drop, let your rib cage drop, you've got more chance of noticing what else is actually supporting you. Now we're going to bear play. Let's just do the legs so from side to side. So once again, as we do this, I can get that little bit of extra movement, say, between the shoulders and the solar plexus. I can stand quite comfortably like this. But if I try and move my shoulder anymore, now suddenly, as soon as I cross a particular line, I'm starting to stiffen up. I'm starting to lose stability, and so on and so forth. So we want to be able to recognize when that's coming. Somebody once said to me, it's like surfing, which I've never done. So I don't know. It's you have to sort of like judge when to catch the wave. And then bear play with the arms. Notice where my hand goes each time again that we come forward a bit. Here. See where my hand is: shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, knee, ankle. Not over here somewhere. Straight forwards. So as you go forwards, there's an opening here because you're sort of pulling the other shoulder away slightly. It's a circle, the arms. So in theory, that should be quite straightforward. In practice, it's a lot more difficult. It's simple enough. It's not complicated, but not easy. And I suppose you could argue with this one that the main kind of intent is downward, because you come up and then you're like the bear with his foot on, his paw on the ground. We're going to change this, and so start with your right hand so you can mirror my movement. And as your hand comes up, instead of directing it downwards, direct it forwards. Now, some of you will have done this exercise with, most of you probably, without the weight moving. It can be done either way. For the moment, keep the weight moving because that's a simpler way of accessing the movement. I sometimes, with physical classes, I'll get a group doing this and they're following just fine. And then I'll stop. I'll go and wander around and see how long they can maintain it for. Once again, it's not complicated. A circle is a very simple shape, but actually maintaining it is quite difficult because we have to keep returning the focus of our attention to the movement. And we need to return it in the correct way. I want you to be aware of your legs, your hips, your center as the sort of, as the center of the movement. We don't ignore our arms, but rather we let the movement of the arms be guided by what's happening in the lower body. And it's a little bit less sort of squirmy, I suppose. Bear play, as I've said before, you kind of roll in the shoulders and so on and so forth. But there's a sense in which we're not wasting any energy here. It's a very, very disciplined exercise, and I think that that precision is actually very important. Shoulders very much connected with the hip. We talk about shoulders being in line with the hip, but of course that doesn't entirely work with what I've been saying today. I'll come back. Okay, and then just shake out. In Chen style Tai Chi, which is one of the styles I've been trained in, we use the phrase the three external harmonies. Sometimes the three external alignments, or sometimes harmonies. I prefer harmony. We also have the three internal harmonies, but the three internal harmonies are these three jewels that I've talked about: body, mind, energy. You might, you might even want to relate that to the three dantians. It would be, which way would it go? So I suppose one way you could do it would be sort of body in the lower, energy in the middle, mind in the top. But the external harmonies are shoulder to hip, elbow to knee, hand to foot. So if we think of them as alignment, then when I stand here, that's fine. I can keep them all in line. But given what I've just been saying, I turn in the hips, I turn in the solar plexus, I turn in the shoulders. Well, yeah, my shoulder is no longer in line in any geometric sense with my hip, but that connection feels very good. If I do this, now it doesn't feel so good. Now it's strained and it's awkward. But here, there's a harmony between shoulder and hip. So when we do something like the exercise we've just been doing from the side, you see my shoulder can go further forward, but not to there. Now it kind of pulls me over slightly. You just get that sense of overextended, like those times when you go to pick something up from a table, it's on the other side of the table, and you reach out, yeah, and then you think, oh, I can't quite get there. You're sort of a bit like that. Or there's something on the shelf and you get there, it's a bit too tall. Those times where you just overextend those boundaries. It's an important thing to notice. 1 foot forwards and transferring your weight. We have the downward movement, yielding movement, the rise and expanding movement. And again, I suppose partly for convenience, sometimes it's convenient, sometimes it's appropriate to think of them as two separate things. But the classic image for yang movement, the quality, the yang energy, is that if you push a piece of wood down in, or a block of wood down in water, it then rises up. But in fact, if you do something like that, or you get a ball and you push it into a bath or something like that, you will feel the upward movement as soon as the downward movement begins. So they're not really separate. They're both yin yang, or yin and yang if you prefer, are there all the time. But again, we choose to emphasize, if you like, one particular aspect. Again, imagine being in water, and if you were to get a bowl of water and hold it still, then you wouldn't spill any. But if you started to move it a little bit from side to side, you'll feel it kind of get a bit heavier on one end, and then you get a bit heavier on the other end. If you just did it very small, it probably wouldn't make a lot of difference. But if you did it quite big, it would build up, because it would go to one side and then go whoops like that, and you'd go back, and then it would get worse. You know, try carrying a bowl of water across the room. You start off and you're fine. By the time you get to the other side, you've sloshed half the water over because it builds up. But that feeling of the movement within the bowl of water is one that we might become aware of in an exercise like this within the body. Think of it as being between front and back for the moment. Sometimes it's more complicated than that, but just think of being between front and back. And think of that as beginning to move your body rather than the other way around. So we imagine that we're full of water and the water's sloshing backwards. And because the water's sloshing back, like holding the bowl of water, the water comes to the back of the bowl, it'll push you back. And if it goes to the front of the bowl, it will push you forwards. So we begin to direct the movement, not just from the push of the legs and so on and so forth, and this overall sense of movement within the body. And of course, later we will bring the arms into that. Raising your toes and your heel. So when we want to make a movement, any or all of these factors may become significant. The natural movement of the body, that sort of sense of the movement expanding up through the body, that sense of the movement moving forwards and backwards through the body, many other things besides, lots of other things that we become familiar with in Tai Chi. Beginning to step, and they get bound together in this quality of intent. We have an intent to step. It's not unconscious, it's not automatic. There's a definite awareness of what we're doing there. We're not just walking along, looking at the scenery or something like that. We're paying attention to the step. Very much so too. This goes beyond simple awareness of the step, what we might call a kind of mindful stepping, into something where we don't just want to be aware, we want to know that it goes down in the right place, much more precise. And all these elements come in the bracket of, or can feed into our intent. On the other side. Because again, we don't want to have to stop and analyze. If you go into the kitchen after the session and put the kettle on, you don't want to have to start thinking, right, now I need to put the foot down and just move this hand. You just want to put the kettle on, but you can still do it with intent, and you can still encapsulate some of these qualities. It's something that sort of grows on you, I think. And then raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. And then taking a few steps. Going back. Okay. Have your right foot forwards and push them and cast them in. And then pushing a wave. We could apply that same expansion, here, belly, solar plexus, chest. If, there's no reason why you shouldn't. So understand this movement from that perspective. And then sink back with your right hand still above the right foot. Turn away from it as you sink into your back leg. And then go forward. You pulse in the monkey. Turn a little to your right. Combining that earlier exercise with a forward and backward transfer of your weight now rather than side to side. And something you can build into this, and I'll just leave it up to you. Don't sort of spoil the session by trying to do this. Just bring the foot in. Now as you turn, you also want to step back. Your foot snakes out. Back, front foot slightly turned out. And everything comes from the center. So fisherman cast a net on the other side. Left foot forwards. And then change. And change. As you get used to the arm movements here and the connection to the center, there's less need to concentrate hard on them. And so you might also become aware of the slight sense of pulling down through your legs as you move the weight and turn. And that's when we can begin to feel that connection from the center down into the feet, and we realize that the step is, for want of a better term, it's kind of natural. It's the obvious time to take a step. We could take a step at another time, but here the movement of the weight and the movement of the center is actively helping us to do that. And bring your feet out now. Now, if that last point didn't make any sense to you, try practicing the walking like this. Normally we would take a step and the front toes would point straight forwards. So when I go forwards, I'm more or less there. But if I turn the front foot out, then as I go forwards, I'm now being pulled around. This can be awkward. I mean, you have to exaggerate it. So if you feel a bit wobbly trying to do it, then don't worry about that. I'm just trying to show you something here. So if I do this from the side, if you look at this hip, I put my hand on my hip, you'll see it more easily. Toes pointing forwards, this is what's happening. There might be a little bit of turning in the body, but not very much. Toes turned out, I'm just being pulled around. And if you now look at my back foot, it's now coming off. So actually, the turn there encourages the step. So you can think about that. You can practice that to start to build the awareness of those connections. We realise that the centre of the body really does connect to all parts of the body, not just above the hips, but below the hips as well. Now, rubbing your hands together. And tapping over the face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. Back. Around your hips. Light on your belly. The upper part. So far as this term the Dantians goes, the major one is generally regarded as being the lower Dantian. So sometimes you may come across reference to the 3 Dantians, but quite often you'll just hear a reference to the Dantian. And to context is Tai Chi, that almost certainly means this area of the body. It's the sort of the principal one, and it's the one that we move out from and come back to. So this is where the grounding, the rooting, the settling, and so on and so forth. This is, you could say, this is the mountain in Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain. So, sinking down that whole area of the lower Dantian, almost sitting on the ground, almost feeling as though it's sitting on the ground, and then pushing up and around and drawing in and one more time. And Thank you very much, everybody. We're a bit over time. I'm sorry about that. Lovely. Thank you then.
Never mind.